podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm Helen O'Grady, a Master Executive Coach and Coach Supervisor and your host for this in-depth series on coaching supervision. Each episode delves into a distinctive aspect of supervision with leading practitioners and thought leaders in the field, uncovering the nuanced ways supervision enhances coaching practice, supports well-being and drives professional growth. Whether you're a seasoned supervisor, a coach curious about supervision, or simply interested in the dynamics of reflective practice, this series offers illuminating conversations that will transform how you think about coaching excellence. So welcome to our final episode of Coaching Supervision Uncovered. It's a joy to be here and I'm really blessed. I've got a trio of master coaches who are joining me for our discussion around DEI. So I will get them to introduce themselves. So Claire, first of all, to you. Are you happy to just tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Claire Pedrick and I'm a coach and supervisor in the UK. I've been coaching for about 35 years. I've been supervising for about 15 years. And I have discovered at the age of 62 that I am neurodivergent. I am also noticing that I work with large numbers of neurodivergent coaches and coaches who are discovering they are neurodivergent.
So piqued your interest that I'm sure was already there, but even more awareness and interest in this space through that neurodivergence lens. Oh, great. Thanks, Claire. Dumi, welcome.
Thank you, Helen. And greetings, everyone. My name is Dumi Magadlela, just go by Dumi. And I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I'm human. I am not a robot. So a sentient being, very keen and interested in human connection, authentic, genuine human connection. I've been a people development practitioner for over 30 years. I love the opportunities that coaching offers us. I consider coaching to be sacred space for exploration of how to be human, because many of us seem to mix it up with other things. So I work on rehumanizing shared spaces, and I think supervision helps humanize coaches and coaching in a way that we get to see each other as fellow helpers along a journey. So I'm very, very happy to be part of this panel with you, Helen, Claire, and over to Shruti.
How beautiful. Thanks, Dumi. And yeah, Shruti, welcome.
Thank you, Helen. I'm Shruti Sonthalia and I'm calling in from Mumbai, India. I wear multiple hats. One of those is of a coaching supervisor. And I've had the privilege of being a coach educator across a few different continents, and the joy of seeing how we train and the people we meet and truly receive and listen to from different journeys, cultures, experiences has really helped me become who I am, both as an individual, as a coach, but also as a supervisor. And building on what Claire and Dumi really said, it is the who we are, the humans that we are, is how we coach and how we supervise. So the who we are is how we coach and how we supervise. And I am really curious, and I always continue to be curious about who we are and who we are continuously evolving to be as individuals and then as practitioners. And I think that's the curiosity with which I'm stepping into this conversation with some of my favorite people.
What a joy. And as you say, that curiosity, but that connection, that global, what a privilege to be hosting this global community, and how fabulous that it's the humanness that connects us all. So thank you all for agreeing to this conversation. I really appreciate it. And maybe let's kick off by thinking about humanness, but humanness in the supervision space, and how we create truly inclusive spaces that welcome that completeness of humanness. And so I'm just interested in, from each of you, what you think those spaces look like, and more importantly, as supervisors, what are the things that we need to be doing to try and create those spaces that are truly inclusive?
Yeah, I'm struck. I had a conversation at the Coaching In podcast a few weeks ago with a coach called Lucy Holborn, and she said, we can't declare spaces safe. Don't you love the word declare?
I know. It's so true. That's what I mean.
It's so different from say. I've always said we can't say a space is safe, but actually we can't declare that a space is safe. We also can't declare that a space is inclusive because
Exactly.
as the supervisor, that's not our decision. I have no idea if it's going to be inclusive for anyone. And so for me, it's about reframing the question, which is what do I need to do as a supervisor in order for this space to be inclusive enough and safe enough and to enable people to show up enough as themselves? So that's the kind of headline. Do you want me to build on that from the neurodivergent space?
Yeah, very happy to.
So one of the things that I'm noticing about neurodiversity is, number one, you can't see it. So we have neurodivergent people in the space who may or may not know they are, and the rest of the group may not know they are. And one of the issues about safety and inclusion is when other people talk about us without knowing we're in the room. So that's one thing. Another thing is people's experience over their whole life of being in groups. Many neurodivergent people have got very mixed experience of being in groups that are confusing because it's unclear how much of that is about me as an individual and how much of that is about me as a neurodivergent individual. So there's something about opening space to enable people to be themselves in whatever way they wish to be if they wish to do that. So I actually host a neurodivergent supervision group, which is really interesting because it's very different from all the other groups that I host. Because there's a known commonality, which is actually a huge known difference, right? Because we're all really different, even though we've got something in common. I notice that people are much more confident in saying out loud how they're experiencing the group because that feels a little bit less risky. So I don't know if I've answered your question at all, but I've kind of downloaded some thoughts.
I think there's lots in there about it being enough, us not being able to declare it's safe or it's inclusive. And I think that's a really important aspect. And that point around actually when it's declared, what that gives permission for and how you're noticing the group being different. So I think there's lots of tips and things that I'm sure the others might want to say something different or build on. So
Yeah.
Dumi.
I love that. Thank you, Helen, for positioning it like that. And Clay, I love that part about neurodiversity. I was tempted to say at some level, we are all neurodiverse. This is why it's very important to know yourself and know thyself. And very, very important. We can't, though, declare it. Like we can't declare safety. We can't just declare that everyone is neurodiverse, because then that those that are now aware of their neurodiversity might feel a bit like you're just lumping us all together. I want to come to the point of inclusive supervision, which is really the topic, what you asked us, Helen, around understanding that. For me, co-creating spaces where people can show up with two major things here. One, vulnerability, to say, this is who I am. As a supervisor or someone seeking supervision in coaching, I am aware of my areas of development or areas where I'm not particularly clear. And I'm coming into supervision vulnerable on my areas that I believe I need to work on. And that takes the second thing, which is the courage. Vulnerability and courage are key in inclusive supervision. If you don't have that, that's when you may not have what Clay is talking about, the safety. For me, safety is co-creating space for others to feel they can be vulnerable. And that can be different from safety, by the way. And it requires courage to be fully me, to show up authentically and say, you know what? These are things that I'm struggling with, or these are things that maybe I'm overdoing because I'm so comfortable in them. That's my default mode. I leave here, so anyway, my client can go this way. I take a detour to my comfort zone. That requires courage and vulnerability. And it starts from being aware of who you are as a practitioner. And many people, we just do things because we're used to doing them. So I just do that. So I wanted to start by positioning that awareness is a big part. Who am I? How am I? And how am I showing up in this sacred space of coaching supervision? Because it is sacred space.
But again, it links into that we can't assume it. And so sometimes it takes time and we have to allow people to test us as supervisors, test the group to be able to demonstrate that. Well, there's very few people who are immediately vulnerable or necessarily immediately courageous in a group they don't know or with a supervisor they don't know. So there's so many aspects of it, aren't there? So it does start with us. Shruti.
Helen, building on just the last point you made and what Dumi was mentioning, I do think that there is, and for instance, with Dumi, I've experienced this. It's the role modeling of vulnerability that creates often a lot of no safety and that experience of opening up. And I do think that's a very, very key ingredient in how we show up as supervisors and our ability to be vulnerable, then that has a ripple effect in itself. Connecting to your question about inclusive supervision, over a period of time, I've come to believe that that looks very different in every geography. And it's really based on the context of that culture and that continent. For instance, race in North America is very different from how that shows up in terms of race and identity in Europe, or the aspects or nuances in which it shows up in India or Asia. And how you define, I believe, inclusion depends on that larger systemic narrative and what is included or what is considered insider and outsider in that culture. So how do you include both what is considered as an insider or unacceptable in that culture, but what stays at the periphery of that culture and creates space for it? And as I was reflecting, I do believe one of the most important pieces of inclusive supervision is how we create room for shame. And if each participant and each coach feels comfortable enough to be present to what might be, evoking shame for them as well, or discomfort for them. And that ability to bring in those parts of themselves into the supervision space, for me, often is an indicator that the space feels safe and inclusive enough.
Shame's such a powerful emotion, isn't it, that we don't talk about. And to me, it also links to what Dumi was saying about being vulnerable. And supervision is the place to talk about the bits of ourselves that we don't like, the bits of our coaching that we're like, oh, I'm not sure about. And often there's a lot of shame and guilt around that, isn't there? I think that's very powerful to name shame as something to give permission for. And that's what I'm hearing is around being explicit, around all of it is welcome. And how do we be curious about that? Claire, you look like something has sparked for you, or maybe I'm imagining that.
I love what you said there about shame, Shruti. And there's also something, isn't there, about our capacity to tolerate discomfort. I'm picking up on what both of you said about vulnerability and courage. And vulnerability is not about pre-thinking, how am I going to say that I'm vulnerable, because that's not vulnerable. There's something about really being able to be vulnerable in the moment, which is going to be terrifying for us as supervisors. And unless we're willing to ride the wave of fear, how are the people that we're working with going to be able to ride the wave of fear? There's something about not pre-cooked thoughts. I mean, I think quite a lot about this because, of course, the more you run groups and the more you run individual supervision, the more you've cooked quite a lot of things. But there's also something about how in this moment do I absolutely show up saying, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to be here, and we don't know how to be together, and mean it.
And I think that's it. It's the meaning it, isn't it? And that otherwise it's not vulnerability, it's fake again. And that makes me think about the parallel process of not knowing in coaching, which again is quite often something that comes into supervision, of coaches wanting to feel control and wanting to be in charge within a coaching conversation. And then how is that mirrored within supervision?
Also hearing Claire, you share right now, one of the things that it brought up for me is it's about how we've met our identities. And I do think each one on this call has had unique journeys to meet our own identities and actually find inclusion for that, whatever it might be, having known each of you. So as a woman of color, what that journey for me has been, and I know both of you have had interesting journeys as well, and the discomfort of meeting our own identities and creating room and acceptance for it I do think it expands our own ability and container to hold space, but also meet very, very different identities on their own journeys with a lot of ease, curiosity, and compassion. And the more I'm open to evolve and meet this evolving journey of my own identity and where it meets the larger context, I think creates space then in the larger scheme of things to meet people just where they are without needing to label it, name it, make it anything more than meeting each other in that moment for who we really are and what is really present.
I love that. You touched on a point, Shruti, on identity. It speaks to something around the intersectionality of it and how it shows up in coaching supervision. Because who is showing up in the coaching supervision in the moment? So it's about understanding that each one of us carries certain things. We show up with something and say, this is who I'm showing up as. Each one of us could mention a dozen things to say, this is who I am now in this moment. And it's very important to notice who you're choosing to show up as in that moment, because that is a mindful presencing thing of saying, this is who I am now. This is who I'm feeling I am now. I'm showing up as this. And this is understanding that showing up as you mentioned, as a woman of color. I don't know what color that is, but yeah, for me, it's an issue there around these things about ethnicity, geography, and the lie of it. So very, very important for us to understand that how I'm choosing to show up is a decision I make every time, every day, in every encounter with others. And that has a meaning on what am I choosing to show up as and what are the reasons behind that. In this panel, what did I choose to show up as? In a coaching supervision session, who is showing up? Is it the middle class professional coach based in Johannesburg, South Africa? Is it the international coaching platform leader, director? Is it a team coach? Is it an Ubuntu coach, someone who works with humaneness? Who is showing up in that moment? And how then is that person that's showing up evoking awareness in others that that particular person is interacting with in that moment? And how do we get to choose this is the person that will best serve the purpose of our interaction in this moment? And this is why for me it's very important that we start from a point of serving, being of service to others the best way possible. That's why preparation for supervision is non-negotiable, because you are going to a space to help co-create a space where others will show up the best way they can by modeling that yourself. So our identities in supervision, in light of our intersectionalities, is very important.
Yeah, it's really key, isn't it? And it's making me think that I quite often in coaching will ask people what feels relevant that you would like me to know about your identity or other aspects. But I'm not sure as a supervisor I've done that as explicitly as I could. So it's this conversation is already sparking stuff for me, which is great. What's it sparking for others?
I love that, Dumi. For me, there's also which bit of my identity am I bringing, but how do I invite you to have the potential to invite a different part of my identity into the space, if that's what serves. And that's opening ourselves up. And that's beautiful, rich, and extraordinarily vulnerable. But when we're coaching, that's what we're hoping for the people we're coaching. So isn't it ironic that we're having this conversation at all, if you see what I mean?
Yeah. As you say, it's the other parallel process, isn't it? And it also makes me think about power as well, you know, as you say, in terms of how do we invite people to ask for a different part of our identity? So, yeah, interested in your thoughts about how we put that other layer of power in as we start thinking about identity and our vulnerability as supervisors.
For me, Helen, there is something about creating safety around the conversation of power very early on in a group, and to feel very comfortable to name power, to talk about power differentials, to talk about identities that feel powered over and powered under, and create spaces of invitation for what that might be doing to each other. And I do believe that that is an uncomfortable and a difficult space, given the life journeys a lot of us have, and the safety, but also the ability to slow down and have that conversation. And not only at a mind level, but our bodies hold power very differently and power differentials very differently. And what happens to us somatically as we're having that conversation is really important. And slowing down to really allow safety and inclusion to be felt in our body as well, I do believe is a really, really key piece to building the container of allowing all that might be. And it's a difficult one because what rank looks like, what privilege looks like, is very different in different places. And what might be acceptable for some might be alien for others. And how do you converse when sometimes you're not even aware of that reality being there in a group? And slowing down for me and really listening to all of ourselves and the unspoken silence, I do believe is a really important key piece as to creating safety and vulnerability in a group. And specifically that unspoken silence that is there, and giving it active voice in some ways, that whose voice is it and what needs to be heard and listened to and named and received.
Yeah, I'm listening to that and fascinated by what you're saying, Shruti, around power. And I had a session where we dealt with this with a group of fellow coaches in supervision, where we explored the issue of power dynamics. How do you manage the power dynamic between supervisor and supervisee to start with? Because by virtue of that relationship, the very word supervisor says authority or rank, as you mentioned, Shruti. How do you dissolve that boundary of I'm a supervisor, you're a supervisee, or you're here for supervision, and there's a supervisor? A very important part is to start with that contracting piece, to say there's a core piece to it, a shared space where we are both growing and learning how to be, how to show up in our world. And that rank is not a major thing, but remember, it is there already. You have done some work, you have done some certification courses to become a supervisor. Therefore, you have some kind of authority of some sort. So how do you play that out in such a way that it's not a factor that impacts the work-life insertion? Because the power dynamic is there. So I don't know what you think of that one, Claire.
I love what you said there, Dumi, because actually the issue is it doesn't matter how much work I've done about power or privilege. It really doesn't. Because if you give me the power and the privilege, then however much work I've done, I've still got it. And giving it back is a really artful and difficult and challenging and not always possible journey. Can I just say I hate the word supervisee? It sounds like a small version of a big person. I think it starts with what we call people, but I've got a thing about it.
I like that.
But it's true, isn't it? We can't just wish it away. And so there is no dynamic there. It's there. But I was really struck by Shruti's reflection on slowing down and bringing full awareness in, because that allows us to pay attention to, is somebody giving me power? What is happening between us? But as you said, Claire, it's very artful. It's hard. I go in with best intentions.
I want to jump in there. I love, you reminded me of what I wanted to add there from what Shruti had said about slowing down. Slowing down in itself is a gift, not to the supervisor or the one coming into supervision. You notice there, Claire, I tried to avoid the word. But it's about understanding that you're giving the gift to the relationship that's playing out in that. And the gift of slowing down is that then there is a moment of taking in what's emerging in the interactive space in the moment. Slowing down is a gift, not just to the individual coaches, people involved, but to the relationship and the space itself. And that allows new dynamics to emerge in that. There's something so powerful about slowing down. But slowing down is the precursor, it's the part before silence. Because silence is a gift itself. That's just an extension or stretching of that. That's a technique. You can call it that in coaching. And in supervision, when you slow down without a patronizing slowing down or patronizing silence, which is more like, all right, what you have to say for yourself on that, it's a different thing. When it's a part where you're saying, I want us to understand each other, I want us to find each other, that slowing down is a powerful gift. And within that, there's something called, we do this in work around Ubuntu, which is a concept which means I am, because we are a recognition of the humaneness of others. It's understanding that in the space of supervision or of coaching in general, you're honoring the other person with the gifts that come through them and expanding the space for them to show up with the gifts that can only come through them. And that is the beauty of both coaching and supervision in that. It's enabling, not allowing necessarily, enabling and modeling how to be more than we have been before meeting.
And there are two pieces that are coming up for me from both, I think, Claire, what you said, and Dumi, what you're saying right now. One for me explicitly is about how do we create distance and almost an element of detachment when power is given to us, and how do we constantly track and be mindful of it. So that's a piece that's very present for me continuously on where is the other person and where am I, and what happens to me if someone is choosing to rank me higher or hold me a certain way, and how do I meet that. And I have to say, I really adore the coaching mindset. I do think it revolutionizes the way we relate with each other in a very unique way. And I do think I bring some of that essence to supervision as well. So for me, the coaching mindset is a radical way of looking at the world, at people. The fact that we truly can see as an other person as a whole and resourceful and creative, for me, truly, I think, breaks so many systems of power and so much conditioning that we've all grown up to. And I do think for me, supervision and just that fundamental lens that the group in front of me knows. And I am here to, in some ways, facilitate. And operating from that knowing of the wisdom that exists in that person or in that group gives me permission to show up differently. And that for me, it's at the essence of, I would say, how I meet a group, or what's really important for me in terms of that relationship of power and the fundamental assumption or belief that I want to show up with.
It's so layered, isn't it? And that's what's the joy of this conversation, is hearing the build and the reflections and going in different ways. Claire, you looked like you had something, otherwise I was going to ask something else.
I'm trying to make sense of it. As both of you were talking, it reminded me of something that Oscar Trimboli says, that he says that in a conversation there's the speaker, the hearer, and the dialogue. Isn't that beautiful? I've been doing lots of work around that in relation to coaching. And suddenly, as you were both talking, I was thinking, of course, and that's also supervision. I'm just thinking out loud here. If you think about that in relation to groups, there are the members and the dialogue, which somehow suddenly seems to be, for me, an easier way of thinking about the space between. So I've been playing with visual aid. So this is my new visual aid, which is just a circle. So this is the space between us. And then we come in, all our people, and how far we feel we're safe to step into the space, or the dialogue, as Oscar calls it, really does depend on so many of the things that we've talked about already. So that's the kind of emerging thought, which is a bit unformed.
Unformed thoughts are very welcome. I love it. I wonder whether there's another layer when we think about supporting coaches within supervision to talk about that dialogue and that relationship again. And how do we invite that in? Or do we have a responsibility, maybe that's not the right word, as supervisors to ask them to bring it in?
That was such an interesting question. Do we have a responsibility as supervisors to ask them to bring it in is a beautiful power question.
Exactly. That was just why I went, as I said, responsibility.
Can I offer something on that?
Please.
Around the power piece. I think it's Thomas Kuhn writes about power as relational, and power is there's a yielding of power and the giving of power, and you can't just take power. Someone has to yield it and give it for you to have it. And the relational nature of it, that's a key dynamic in power relationships anyway. And Clay referred to it a little earlier. It's understanding that there are structural dynamics in the workplace if you're working within an organization. So we need to understand the systemic nature of power in that particular context. And this is why it's important for coaches and supervisors and others to understand the context of that relationship. If there's a relationship of coaching, supervision, or just any other kind of work or facilitation of some sort. What are the power dynamics at play? And sometimes we take that phrase glibly, we just say power dynamics, but we don't really delve deeper into understanding what are we talking about. Because you can have structural power of an organogram of positional power, and you can have other power that's much bigger. This is why what Shruti was saying about coaching mindset is very important. Understanding the coaching mindset that you come in with. I always moderate it and say, instead of coaching mindset, this is, we all know from the International Coaching Federation of competencies, I look at coaching heart set. Is it a cognitive thing to you and in a head knowing of it, or is it a lived, embodied way of being that you're talking about? Because a coaching mindset could be, I know what's required and tick the box, and it's a technical skill knowing part. And a big part of a masterful way of doing it, Shruti. I mentioned the word master, Shruti, right there. Masterful coaching requires that you step into your being, and your being shows up more in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dumi. And just as you were sharing, power is so complex, and what you was in terms of systemic. And I remember during the pandemic when US was going through the transition it was, and even now, and working with coaches that were working with humanitarian organizations. It was not easy. It was not pretty. And how do you hold the complexity of not only where the coaches, but so many larger systemic dynamics that were there, and honor all of that together as you're having a conversation? And there's something about that piece about interconnectedness and context that is so key to really holding and really finding meaning and navigating what is. And for me, that was a point of time where I think it was one of the most complex pieces as a supervisor I was meeting, but I was also seeing coaches meet unprecedented complexity and uncertainty. And how do you meet the moment for what it is? Because what that reality is was also shifting week to week. And I do believe that even as we're talking about supervision and coaching supervision, a lot more of the larger systemic issues. Helen, we were talking about climate change before we went. I do believe all of that today sits within that space of inclusive supervision. And we don't know what reality might require more time and space, but it's really present. And for me, that's very part of the realities we need to navigate, or at least hold with awareness and gentleness as supervisors.
And I love that acknowledgement that context is changing all the time. You know, it was very visible that it was changing so rapidly during COVID. But as you say, with a supervision group or an individual, the context from one session to the next may have vastly shifted. So we can't assume that because we understood the context at 1 minute, the next time we meet, either with a group or an individual, that it's the same. So another layer.
Shruti, thank you so much for talking about interconnectedness. Because the thing that has been emerging for me for the last little while is the thing about connection and belonging. And again, how do we create a space where people can belong so that they can create a space where people can belong? And what does belonging look like and what does connection look like? Dumi is going to do a much better build on that than I am, so I'm going to stop.
You know that, Claire,
I'm handing over the tag to you.
I was going to say, no pressure, Dumi, but off you go.
I think the three of you, my fellow panelists, you know that this is home ground. This is a subject I love very much. And Shruti, you know this very well. For me, connection, interconnectedness, and the value that we draw from seeing each other as we are is vastly underestimated. The power that we get from that, a big part of our real purpose for being alive, really to help co-create spaces where we can all show up with the gifts that are in us. Both coaching and supervision are small contributions towards that way we co-create space for others to be themselves with less judgment, without the fear of what will Claire, Helen, or Shruti think of this if I did this or if I said this. We're always doing that. We're always self-calibrating to suit and fit what we think others think of us. And safety means that I can be free and be me and know that it's okay to be me and that other people's views of that may not be damaging to me, whatever that me is. So for me, the work we need to be talking about, to do here around coaching and coaching supervision uncovered, really, it's about honoring the whole person. Are we honoring the whole person with how we're showing up in supervision? Same question in coaching. What that means is we park our own judgments in the true sense of it, even in the body language and everything else. How do we show up in such a way that the other person feels at ease to be themselves and to be authentic? So it's deep layers of empathy and compassion that come through in how we're showing up for others to feel, it's okay to talk about this. All right, I'm going to go into it. That's a gift to yourself and to the other in that moment.
And I'm struck by, as you say, that interconnectedness and that space to enable people to bring whatever parts of themselves that they choose to, but they still have the choice. So it's back to letting go of that power of I'm not expecting you to talk about this part of you unless it feels relevant for you and you want to, but I want to be creating a space where you feel able to share any part of who you are without that judgment.
And there's something for me about both, Claire, the question you asked, and Dumi, what you shared, that there is this quality of both difference, but there is also interconnectedness and belonging. And for me, just us sitting here speaks a lot. That was part of, I think, my joy in having this conversation. We live in 3 different continents, and our realities might be very different in how and what life looks like, coaching looks like, our realities look like. And yet, for me, there is a fundamental thread that is so core to who we are that aligns us. And there's something about that quality or that essence of who we are that I also see in the groups we all attract in some ways. That how and where does the levels of power and identity and all of that come with us as human be present? And yet, Claire, what you were talking about, and Dumi, that the ability to connect with each other and that space of belonging starts becoming so much stronger, that the diverse identities and the safety that exists helps each one expand to being more. And I don't think I have access to that individually. It's through each one of you and your experiences and your coaching and your supervision and my connection with you that I expand as a being. And that's for me the same thing in our supervision groups for everyone who shows up.
There's something, isn't there, about being connected to being a learner and being connected to being open and being connected to being connected. If we just quickly jump back to privilege, I think there's a connection, but I'm not quite sure how. For me, I learn more about connecting to myself when I am the only person like me in the room. Now, of course, we're always the only person like me in the room because we're all unique. But there's also something about where do we do our learning about belonging and connectedness that is outside of the coaching space and is outside of the space where we are the professional that someone else is paying to do this thing. Where's our own personal learning lab, which may be nothing to do with coaching or supervision. It might just be to do with something terribly human and ordinary. And that is also a place that we do deep learning, I think.
Which is back to the humanness and the completeness, that it's not just one mask. We might choose to put that identity on, but actually it's our completeness, isn't it? Gosh, we could keep going with all these layers of so much. It's such a fascinating conversation and I'm so grateful. But as we come towards the end, I'm interested to hear from each of you and what's coming up and what feels most relevant for us as individuals, but for our listeners as well, that you want to re-emphasize or pull together. Shruti, I'll come to you first. I'll go in the other way around my screen.
Helen, what's on top of my mind is listening, and really listening for the spoken, but the unspoken as well. And often creating spaces or seats for those in certain groups that might not have an identity or a room. So consciously creating spaces for those identities and inviting people to give it a voice. So I think I'm just present to the question about what is key ingredient of supervision or inclusive supervision. I go back to, I think, the most simplest ingredient possibly, listening, and listening from my whole being to the other person's whole being, and really listening when I sense discomfort or tension in another being as well, and pausing to create room, space, and safety for that impulse that they are experiencing.
Lovely. Thanks, Shruti. Dumi?
Yeah. Thank you, Shruti, for that. And Claire and Helen, I love how you've moderated this for us to talk freely and flow like this. For me, 2 words building on, I had 3, Shruti took the other one, conscious. So for me, it's 2 words, availability. It's what am I available for in this moment with another in coaching? It's sort of belonging, identity, awareness, all those things. There's a subtle part about availability that we open up to when we're in supervision or in coaching. Which part of me is available to this person in front of me in this moment? And which part of me is not available? And then that leads up to the next word, which is access or accessibility. Which part of me is accessible to me and to them, and then to our relationship in this moment? The subtle differences between availability and accessibility. And when we are in these consciously, we're able to find resonance with others that is non-judgmental and that creates safety for fellow beings to authentically show up with the gifts that they have within them and then express them in interaction with others. And that is a gift to all humanity and not just to the one in front of me. But thank you for this. This has been magical.
Thank you for your gifts, Dumi, and your wisdom. It's wonderful. Claire, last but not least, obviously.
I'm going to steal half of Dumi's. About authentically showing up. There's a question for me that I'm taking away about how do I authentically show up, and which part of my identity happily authentically shows up, and which part of my identity am I withholding that's costing the potential for the work that we might do. Because this is really scary space.
I think that's important to name, Claire, isn't it? Because I think there is a lot of fear of getting it wrong, fear of offending people, fear of being unintentionally exclusive and all of that stuff. So thank you for naming the scariness, Claire. I think that is important. And we've talked lots about interconnectedness, so it would be great to hear from each of you about how any of our listeners can connect with you and work with you all. So again, I'll ask you to share anything that you want to or ways that people could work with you. Shruti.
My website, ruco.org, LinkedIn, and we are actually going to be starting something for winter. So you can also look up some of the groups that are launching, which are quite intercultural. So I think those are the immediate 3 things that come up for me. That would be the go-to place. But LinkedIn is a great place to start, and then the website.
Lovely. And again, people can go back and listen to our conversation, Shruti, because we talked about quite a lot about power. So that episode is available from earlier on if people want to hear more about that. So thanks, Shruti. Dumi?
Yeah, like Shruti said, on LinkedIn, available on LinkedIn is Dumi, my surname, Magadlela. And then also my website, Africa Coaching, which is Africa with a K, Africa Coaching, www.africacoaching.com. You'll find us there, and growing that part. Also, the same website page you'll find on LinkedIn with africacoaching.com on that. But available also on X and other platforms at Coach Dumi1 on X and Interactive, and really wanting to engage. So let's connect. Let's talk to each other around how we're showing up in this digitized world where we have other beings, non-sentient beings that are in our space now. Let's partner with them.
Sounds wonderful. Thanks, Dumi. Claire?
Well, I hope that the four of us can have a conversation in the comments when you share this on LinkedIn with listeners. That'd be amazing. The best way to connect with me is LinkedIn. I have an accessible supervision community, and that includes some groups that are exclusively for neurodivergent coaches, as well as lots that are for everybody.
Fabulous. And likewise, there's an episode that's available for people to listen to, Claire, where you and I talked about humanness. So lots of themes that have come into this wonderful discussion again. So thank you so much for helping me end our series in such an insightful and interesting global way. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Shruti. Thank you, Claire. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.